Alright guys, here we go. So this is Oedipus at Colonus, and kind of the background on that, just so we can kind of abridge what's going on between Oedipus and Antigone. I'm going to do my best to make this quick. There is a little bit of an activity that goes along with this, but again, you can view this, or I will link the presentation as well in its own entirety, so you can kind of go through it on your own as you will. I hope everybody's doing well, and is safe and healthy. So let's go ahead and get this started. So, a couple things. Oedipus at Colonus was written as the last chronology of the plays. I think we talked about this already. However, it is considered the second play in the trilogy. Now, Sophocles took actually 36 years to write them all, starting with Antigone, then Oedipus, and then Oedipus at Colonus. So we're kind of, he kind of wrote it out of order. For various purposes. And Oedipus at Colonus, I think, holds a very particular meaning for Sophocles himself. More on that a little bit in a second. He didn't get to perform this play, although we didn't tend to perform most of his plays. I think he was a great playwright, not necessarily a great actor. Nor did he actually finish it. His grandson produced the play instead. It was the first play that also included the scheme in the interior of the palace. So it opened up the scheme so that you could ideally see what was going on internally there. So that was one more of those layers, if you will, to the development of drama that he and Aeschylus and other guys were contributing to during that time period. So the play begins after the self-imposed exile of Oedipus. So at the end of Oedipus, he's gouged his eyes out, and he's figured all this stuff out, and he's made a plea to Creon to let him go. And Creon allows for this. Now, while Oedipus has made a request that Creon take care of his children, Antigone chooses to insists on being his caretaker, as he needs somebody to pay attention to him. So Antigone is his youngest daughter. And at the beginning, they're entering a village of Colonus. Colonus was a village outside of Athens. Hint, hint, that is where Sophocles was from. So that'll play in a little bit to this story. They are met by a villager who demands they leave because the grove in which they have entered, it's an olive grove, is sacred to the Furies. So the Furies, or Erinyes, are emerged from the deepest, darkest chasm of creation, and they punish anyone who has violated natural order. At least that's their original purpose. That includes, obviously, most of what Oedipus has done. So at this point, some legends claim that Furies are now protectors of justice and are benign. So that is mostly one and the same, quite frankly. So anyways, Oedipus, upon being told to leave, recalls another prophecy that the oracle at Delphi gave him, which involves blessing whatever land Oedipus is buried. How very convenient. He uses this to his advantage by offering it to Athens in exchange for a safe harbor. He just needs to find a place that will take care of him at this point as a disgraced king, and at this point, blind man. Now, Ismene, the other daughter, arrives and rejoices to see her father and sister, but she's not coming with happy news. So there's this setup that Eudicles and Apollonices, the sons of Oedipus, had. Specifically, it was they would exchange power every 6 months back in Thebes, as they were the heirs to the throne. So Creon, while he steps in initially, it is Apollonices and Eudicles who ultimately take over. Problem is, Eudicles decides, after his little 6-month stint, he does not want to give up his power. So he refuses to give up the power, and he instead threatens his brother. This drives Apollonices out of town, and causing yet another rift in Thebes. They just can't catch a break from this family, apparently. Now, Apollonices gathers an army to force Eudicles to honor the agreement, and that is his initial objective. So this kind of leads to a really weird situation, because while Apollonices is just trying to get back his, bi-yearly authority here, he is also putting Thebes itself under some level of threat, as he's kind of quote-unquote forced to by his brother. So an old prophecy, again going back to this, foretold victory in battle to any city where Oedipus lay buried. So, because of this, the aged pariah, or Oedipus, who's now been cast out, becomes a person of interest again, and Polynices and Creon plan to unfairly influence this former tyrant slash father slash brother slash brother-in-law slash nephew. It's complicated. But the point here is that Polynices on one side is busy hoping to use his father as an influence to regain his power, and Creon is also playing that as a man attempting to protect the city. Now remember, Creon claims that he has the city's best interest in mind at all times, much like we saw Oedipus. Now Creon attempts to force Oedipus back to Thebes by kidnapping Antigone, because that is always going to go over well. Kidnapping a man's daughter, right? It's just another episode of Taken. Holding her in Thebes, along with Ismene, already taken. There it is. Sounds like a good idea, right? Well, Creon wants to bury Oedipus outside the city to prevent any undue influence. And then Theseus, tyrant of nearby Athens and supporter of Oedipus, ruins the plan by rescuing Antigone. And again, remember that they've already shown up in Athens and requested safe harbor, so he kind of comes to his rescue. Polynices, though, then decide to try something else to escalate the situation. He admitted that he, not Antigone, should have remained by his father's side, but Oedipus was no fool. Fate had taught him well. He refused to forgive his son. Okay, he loathed the sound of his son's voice. Basically, he realized his son is just playing this trick on him, or just trying to play, nice to his father, now that he has a use for him. So instead of in grave terms, he foretells the deaths of both his sons in a futile battle. As it is, he already knows bad crap's going to happen to his children. So, returning to Thebes without his father, but with his father's prophetic words, Polynices nevertheless vows to battle his brother. So, part of that is because he wants to appear as determined and capable leader to his father. So you're noticing an ongoing trend in the character of these folks in the House of Cadmus, including even Creon, but we're also going to see it in Antigone, with Antigone, when we get to her. So, returning to Thebes without his father, but with his father's prophetic words, battles his brother. He returns to vows to battle his brother for his rightful authority. Antigone states her undying support for her brother by vowing to care for his remains when the inevitable happens. That essentially sets up the whole issue that happens in Antigone. Now, burial is considered a god-given right. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, here's how things go down with Oedipus. At an olive grove near Colonus, Oedipus is summoned to the afterlife by the gods themselves in this kind of very ethereal and blessed sort of thing for all the suffering that he has done by the hands of the gods. He is ultimately redeemed, in a sense. Theseus, his ally from Athens, witnesses the mystical passage. He then refuses to divulge the details of the event and leaves his ascension or burial place, whatever you want to call it, to be a sacred place. It also means that Athens now is the sacred city that is protected by Oedipus's death. This plays also in because Sophocles, I think in some ways, is trying to connect himself as an old man on his last leg to Athens, that he may be celebrated in a similar fashion, not that he had a prophecy about him. Now, in the story of the Seven against Thebes, which was actually played with by Aeschylus, Polynices and 6 loyal chieftains attempt to invade the city held by Oedipus, the rebellious brother. Now, there are 7 gates of Thebes, so they all choose to attack one of these 7 gates, ultimately get to infiltrate the city and establish authority there. The Theban army repulses the attack. It's obviously a very well fortified place. The armies actually end up at odds. Very little ground is made on either side. Now, because this wouldn't be a Sophocles play without more prophecies, Creon is told by Tiresias that the war will not end until his son Megareus dies in battle. Creon cares too much for his son, so he tries to send him anyway. Megareus gets wind of the prophecy, but instead of leaving, he chooses to fight and show his courage. So, Creon attempts to get his son out of the battle, but Megareus, with his own sense of pride, runs off to fight the battle, and he doesn't fare very well because he's not much of a fighter, so off he goes. So Creon has his own skin in the game, shall we say, or his own child ends up dying, and that plays out as well because Creon develops, obviously, a greater sense of vengeance and hatred for Polynices, who brought this all upon the city. So, eventually the warring armies get tired enough to just decide the victors through the brothers. Sophocles has them meeting each other on the battle during the war. Oedipus and Polynices essentially both died at each other's hands during the attack. Some accounts have them wrestling, one with a sword and the other with a spear. Some accounts have them throwing a spear at each other. One way or another, they both died. Creon, who now becomes the new king of Thebes, because there was literally no one else to take over, heralds the bravery of Oedipus, the man who was protecting the city, and provides his corpse the proper burial rites. He's left the body of Polynices to rot for the animals and the birds to consume. Now, this was typically or technically against the laws of the gods, the rules of the Greeks, and as given by the gods, was that you should bury the bodies, and that it was a massive disgrace to not do so, as a person's soul from being as it kept a person's soul from being delivered to the underworld. He also did not allow for any of the enemy to be buried, so this was kind of a pretty unpopular thing. And if you think of ancient Greece at the time, if you have a king or a tyrant who is busy trying to shift gears in their value systems of something like this nature, it would, there's a warning in this, as there was with even Oedipus. So, he did this to assert his new authority as king. It was his way of trying to show that he meant business and he was not to be trifled with, and yet it did not go well, as we will find out in Antigone. Even people of his city kind of furrowed their brows about this. Now, Athens eventually goes to war to reclaim the bodies. In an act of virtue, when Athens has access to the bodies, they end the war instead of leveling Thebes. How nice. So, Athens has the opportunity to just, lay waste to Thebes, but instead they're just like, give us our bodies. But yet, the problem still remains that Polynices is still out there. He's left behind as he's not a man of Athens, so the Athenians did not take him back. So the play Antigone begins with the two sisters in the front of the gates discussing the new edict by Creon. Some sources again claim that Thebes was satisfied by the edict, other that it was of its controversial nature. What we see in the play is that it's got mixed feelings, depending on how people sided. Now remember, Polynices was literally just trying to get his own authority back in Thebes, but obviously it's not very popular that he decides to go to war against them. But that's how wars are fought. It's, all the collateral damage and casualties of the citizenry. There you go. Others state that it was shocking, but no one dared to challenge the new king. That's mostly what we see, actually. Antigone, as the family-oriented one, refuses to honor the new decree. She says, no, my brother must be buried. We're not going to let this happen. And is pretty blunt about breaking rank here on this rule. So she has come to ask Ismene for help. Ismene, however, is the obedient one, going, what are we to do? We're just women. And things then go from there. Now, just to complicate matters, Antigone happens to be engaged to Haman, who is Creon's son, because keeping it in the family. And that's how things kind of then are left when we get into Antigone. So, that pretty much wraps up Oedipus at Colonus. Now, a couple last things there. There's a lot of speculation that Sophocles felt very close to this one. He's the old man getting ready to die. It's very much where Sophocles was when he's writing this, and this whole blessing on Athens, and that's what he kind of wanted his own burial to feel like, etc., etc. So Colonus was a little bit different in that sense. Now, again, Antigone was the first one written, and so we're going to see something a little bit more classic, even than we saw with Oedipus, in the sense that Antigone kind of follows a little bit more. When we see Creon, there's a little bit more of a standard tragic hero and hamartia and all that sort of thing. So, as we get into Antigone, kind of keep in mind where we've been and where we're going here. And yet again, we will see tragedy ensue. So, thanks for watching. Make sure that you're filling out that little worksheet just to make sure you're covering your bases and you got those notes and submitting in the classroom. And I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.